Hello and welcome to this session. In this session, we will understand what is big data. So, what is big data? So, there may be different definitions for big data. So, big data in a layman's term is huge amount of data. But how big is big data? Is it terabytes? Is it petabytes? Again, it depends upon the definition to definition. But generally, anything about terabytes or petabytes is something which we call as big, and it's something that we wanted to process using big data technologies. So it's one of the definition is basically collection of data that is huge in volume, and it is something which is growing with time exponentially. It's not very static. So today you have 100 GB, then it goes into 120, 150, 200. It just keeps on growing with time. So that is your big data. There are also other characteristics of big data that we will see in a moment. But so what are some of the examples of big data? So anything that is generating out of the social media, like for example you have a Facebook, you have the likes, the number of likes that a page is generating, that's huge. If you're using Twitter, you will know the number of tweets that happens per second, so some in millions and millions of tweets that is going happening, the sharing as well. So all of them, there's so much of data that is being generated by a single click using the social media platforms, whether it's Facebook, whether it's Twitter, whether it's Instagram. We also have the sales details like from the big companies like Walmart. So if you do a Walmart, so if you know, Walmart is a very big retail company which has some hundreds and thousands of products. So there are a lot of transaction that happens with Walmart. So it generates huge amount of data every single day, huge amount of transactions. Also, another example could be the jet engine data. So basically, the flight carry more than 10 terabytes of data. It can generate more than 10 terabytes of data in 30 minutes of flight time. So that's the amount of data that is getting generated. So, and there are so many other examples of big data where the data is getting generated exponentially. So we have different tools where we can process this data and generate some desired business results. Now, what are the types of big data? So, big data can be structured. You have a structure, you have a columns, you have a basic definition of the columns, whether it's a string, whether it's integer. Example like your SQL tables, the data comes in a structure that is good and that is easy to handle. Sometimes it can be a semi-structure, for example, in XML, and then you can also be unstructured. It does not have any structure. For example, if you Google something, the data that comes up in one result may be very different in the other results. The files, the audio files, the video files, PDFs, all those things, we can process all of them in using the big data. So some of the characteristics of big data, again, it varies from definition to definition, but some will have the uh, top 3 V's, some will say 5 V's, some will say 7 V's. So basically some of the characteristics are like the volume, as we always talk about, the huge volumes of data coming from terabytes to petabytes and others. And velocity is basically the speed at which the data is getting generated. For example, you see millions of tweets, but they're generating at a single second, 1 second. So that's the velocity. Variety of data is basically the types of data. For example, your structure, semi-structure, you have PDF files, you have audio files, your video files, so many types of data that is being generated every day. And then veracity is basically how trustworthy is the data, how accurate is the data. It is an important aspect because having huge amount of data is good, but then if your data is not the right one, if you have bad data, if it is giving you bad information, then the output that is coming out of it also be not accurate, which basically is very bad for business because you will end up taking bad business decisions. So it is also very important that the data that you collect should be trustworthy and should be accurate. And again, value. Just because you have the data does not mean anything. You'll have to analyze and bring out the results out of it. Unless you bring out the data out, value out of it, the big data is of no use. So these are some of the characteristics of the big data. And again, as I mentioned, you might find some saying it's 3 V's or 5 V's, but these are basic generic characteristics of big data. Now, we can store the big data in a distributed way, as we have seen in the earlier classes, but the other important aspect of it is how we are processing that big data. Having the data is one thing, but how do we drive the results out of the data? How do we process the data? Now, there are so many tools in the market which help us in processing the big data. This is just a very small list of them. We will see some of those in our course. The Hive is basically like an SQL kind of thing. We have Spark, we have streaming processing like Kafka, we have NoSQL databases, then we have Flink, Presto, Hoodie, Druid. So many of them are there in the market. So it's if you can get hold of it, a three or four, then you will have a great career because these are all open sources. Expect more and more tools to come up into the market, but at right now Spark is something which is very hot in the market, and this is something which we are going to cover in our course as well. So this is a small introduction of what big data is, what are the different technologies that been available in the market. So we will have an extensive discussion and hands-on on some of these tools in the coming sessions. So I hope this session was insightful and you're able to grasp. And I'll see you guys in the next session.